Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to a Tuesday edition of the Southside Beat. A little bit later today, a couple hours later, but obviously today was a pretty big day across the National Football League. It was cut down day, and thus that's why we're here later, because we needed to actually cover it. And so we've got everything up on our site at DKPittsburghSports.com. So but we thank you guys for tuning in here to the Southside Beat here on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcasting Network and YouTube channels. My name is Chris Halicke. Joining me is Greg Macafee. Greg, initial impressions of the 53-man roster. We know it's not going to be the 53 guys that make the trip to Atlanta for the season opener, but just initial reaction right off the bat. Any surprises one way or the other? Guys who were left off the roster, guys who made the roster. Who was your biggest surprise?
I think it was pretty much straight up. I mean, these are all guys that we expected to make the roster for the most part. I think the two, one of the ones that kind of stood out to me that it was kind of a surprise was Jalen Elliott. He's one guy that we haven't really seen a lot of this year, or seen a lot of throughout training camp. So I was kind of surprised to see his name. I was actually like, I was counting up my roster, and he was the guy that I was missing when I asked if I had 52. He was the guy I was missing. So that was kind of a surprise. One guy that stood out to me, Des Fitzpatrick, I thought he came on. He's come on pretty strong over the last couple weeks, especially kind of filling in at that gunner spot. So he was one guy that kind of surprised me that he didn't make it, especially when they only went with 5 wide receivers. I thought they be 5-6 area, but he was one guy. And then I think the other one was, obviously, I think this was more of a Nate Herbig getting injured type of deal. Ryan McCollum, he's going to probably be that backup center, but he was another guy. Not necessarily surprised that he made it, but he was kind of one of those bubble guys. I think that we weren't sure if he was in or out.
Yeah, the Jalen Elliott, he seems like, to me, the 53rd guy right away.
Yeah.
Like the next time the Steelers make a roster move and they have to clear a roster spot, he's going to be the casualty, or at least a prime candidate for it. First off, I don't see the need for 5 guys who really can only play safety, and 4 is pretty much the magic number there. I would think that 5th guy would be more of a Ryan Watts situation, but who can kind of play multiple positions. But obviously Ryan, in case you didn't know, and we can put it on here actually really quick, Ryan Watts' season is over, as he is one of 2 additions on injured reserve. So joining the likes of Nate Herbig on injured reserve, the 2 players that were also placed on IR today are Ryan Watts and Julius Welschoff, who was the edge rusher, the German edge rusher. Both guys really kind of made improvements over the course of the last couple of weeks, and I thought Welschoff had a chance to at least be considered for that 4th edge rusher, along with Jeremiah Moon, or and who would who knows, but apparently not. Apparently his season's over on IR. Dylan Cook and Jeremiah Moon have also been placed on IR, but they are placed on there with a designation to return, so they can return at some point. I think they have to sit out a minimum of 4 games before they can be brought back. And the same goes for Cole Holcomb, who was placed on the PUP list, physically unable to perform. He's out for the first 4 games of the season as well. That came as no surprise, given what the Steelers did with his contract during training camp to save themselves $3 million. Getting some questions on Ryan Watts' injury. So, Rochelle asks, what exactly is his injury, and said, that initially after the game they did say stinger. Now, this is one of those situations where I didn't get verbal confirmation, so I can't say what I saw in practice today. But if I can get verbal confirmation tomorrow, I will say it. But once I would say something like that, it would make a lot of sense. I'll put it that way. It was worse than a stinger. That's the best way I can put it. He was I can say this: he was walking around. That's not giving anything around. So it's not like he's, it was a significant injury to the point where but it was obviously significant enough where he's out for the season. So, but that's pretty much the way I can say. And then Chris Chin here asks, so let's really quick. I'll just so that I'm not having to list the whole 53. I'll take the offense. You take the defense. I'll put it that
we can
way.
Do that.
We'll list this out position by position. We don't have to break it down position by position, but at least let's list the names in case anybody didn't know. Quarterbacks are the obvious three: Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, and Kyle Allen. Big shocker there. Same thing with running back: Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, Cordell Patterson. All right, so those are taken care of. Receivers, this is interesting, and we'll get to receiver eventually here on the show. 5 receivers to start: George Pickens, Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin III, Roman Wilson, and Scotty Miller. Those 5 guys are the initial receivers. No Des Fitzpatrick. We'll get to that here in a little bit. Tight ends, 4 tight ends: Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington, Connor Hayward, and Michael Pruitt. And then on the offensive line, Dan Moore Jr., Isaac Seumalo, Zach Frazier, James Daniels, Broderick Jones, Troy Faltanu, Mason McCormick, Spencer Anderson, and Ryan McCollum is the 9th guy. And I saw somebody ask about him. I'll get to that here in a little bit. But who are the defensive players on the 53-man roster?
All right, so this is who we have on the defense. We start with the defensive line. We got Montravius Adams, Keanu Benton, Cam Hayward, DeMarvin Leal.
Okay, sorry. Maybe everything was cutting out for a second. I don't know what was going on. I wasn't sure if it was me or you.
All right, I'll start over. Defensive line: Montravius Adams, Keanu Benton, Cam Hayward, DeMarvin Leal, Logan Lee, Isaiah Loudermilk, Dean Lowry, Larry Ogunjobi. And then we go to linebackers. We got Nick Herbig, Alex Highsmith, Tyler Matt, Patrick Queen, Landon Roberts, Mark Robinson, TJ Watt, and Peyton Wilson. And then defensive backs, we got the undrafted free agent Beanie Bishop, Deshaun Elliott, Jalen Elliott, Minka Fitzpatrick, Dante Jackson, DeMonte Casey, Miles Killebrew, Joey Porter Jr., Darius Rush, and Corey Trice Jr. And then I'll finish it up with the special teams. Pretty straightforward. Chris Boswell as the kicker, Cameron Johnston as the punter, and then Christian Kuntz as the long snapper. Kuntz.
All right, so there was that. There are obviously some some questions about, and for example, there's one here. Humberto asks, any rumors on Steelers signing any player cut from another team? Well, of course there are rumors, and of course the Steelers are going to be doing their due diligence. I love saying that now just because it does irritate some people. But they will be doing their due diligence in terms of looking elsewhere. Teams have until noon Eastern tomorrow, Wednesday, to put in claims on any players that were waived today. And so I do expect, and this is why we say the initial 53-man roster, this is not going to be the group of 53 that travels to Atlanta. There will be further changes, whether it is players that are added via waivers or players that are acquired via trade. However it is, there will be more players now. Tim Patrick, the receiver from Denver, there were rumors about teams being interested in him via trade. The Broncos did not pull off a trade, so they waived him. And so that's a player to watch for sure, especially with these receivers. 5 guys, like they need an upgrade there, and Tim Patrick would be a nice addition. So there's that. John Mechie III, I don't think that he's a guy, but Noah Brown, another receiver from the Texans, it was another guy who was a casualty earlier today, and that could be a nice addition. A guy who has some pass catching ability, who's a really good blocker. I think he'd be a good fit in the Arthur Smith offense. These are obviously some of the cheaper additions, but still quality additions. Like it would make their receiver room better now, not much better. This isn't a Brandon Ayuk type acquisition, obviously, but it's still, it would be either one of those guys would be a nice addition. I'll put it that way. J Moods asks, is Beanie making it to Atlanta? Beanie Bishop is on the roster. I have my doubts that he's going to be the guy that goes to Atlanta, because throughout this waiver process, I do think that they might look outside for a slot corner. What say you, Greg?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I feel like I've been trying to get like a kind of a heat check on how Tomlin, like what Tomlin feels about Beanie, and it always seems like he hasn't done enough yet. And I think that's made me think, from the beginning, that there's the outside higher options to kind of bridge this gap until Cam Sutton comes back from his 8-game suspension. I think he's there for right now. I think, maybe they run a little bit of the 3 safety package at times as well to kind of, fill in that gap. But I think at some point over the next couple days, next week or so, before they go down to Atlanta, I think there's an outside hire that comes in at some point.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think that the corners that they have on the roster are going to be all of the corners that are on the roster come the season opener. Steelers Nation number 43 asks, hey Chris, what are your thoughts about Ryan McCollum making the team? Obviously they need a second center, and I think just for now at least they opted to go with a guy that's already in-house. So it does keep some level of continuity, which, shoot, man, as we've seen with Justin Fields and what he's, had issues with the center exchanges and everything like that, I think you could use all the continuity you can get. Not that Justin Fields is going to be the starting quarterback. We know that Russ is going to be the starter. That'll become official tomorrow, but still, it's just keeping a guy, you keeping a second center. They're still going to survey options. I wouldn't be surprised if the offensive line is an area in which you see at least one change. That would not surprise me at all. And then Chris Chin asks, and I'll let you take this one, Greg. So we're not running with a fullback this season, huh?
Well, I mean, we've talked about Jack Leto, all throughout training camp and whether he was going to make the roster or not. And I think over the last couple of weeks, we've kind of softened on him a little bit, and just because of, the lack of versatility on special teams and everything like that. So for right now, I think they're going to run with Connor Hayward. McCole Pruitt is a guy that can line up back there as well. He's done it before in Arthur Smith's offense in Atlanta. But I mean, also wouldn't count out the possibility that he signs to the practice squad and they elevate him on game days and things of that nature. But yeah, right now, no true fullback on the roster.
Dwayne here says bring number 34 back, and if it's the player that I'm thinking of, that would be Terrell Edmonds.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's going to happen. Listen, there are certain players out there, and actually Chris B71 here says it. Boykin sounds great to me, for real. I would actually think that Miles Boykin makes a great addition, because the Steelers need a gunner. Darius Rush might be the best one that they have right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how much I would trust that. I would at least get Miles Boykin back if possible. The Giants do want to try to bring him back onto the practice squad. So I don't know if you could squeeze him on the 53-man roster. Maybe you could. I don't know. But I do think that would be better. But in terms of Terrell Edmonds, listen, they've got Minkah Fitzpatrick, Deshaun Elliott, DeMonte Casey, Miles Killebrew. None of those 4 guys are going to be off of the roster. They're not going to opt for Terrell Edmonds over any of those 3 guys. Terrell Edmonds is essentially what Deshaun Elliott is in terms of scheme and where he would have to line up. And sorry, Deshaun Elliott is better than Terrell Edmonds. 100%. I would stand by that in every way possible. That's not saying that Terrell Edmonds is a bad player, but how many teams has he had to be on since he left Pittsburgh? And that will kind of tell you, compared to what the contract that Deshaun Elliott got this past, free agency. I think that's all you need to know in terms of who the better player is.
Yeah.
And so, Tim here asks anyone else miss Pat P a little bit? I don't know. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be Patrick Peterson, but I do think to what we were talking about earlier, the slot corner spot is going to be something that has to be addressed. I don't know what options are going to be out there. There's a lot of players out there right now.
Yeah.
But that is one of the positions when we're talking about most likely positions to be added to or at least changed. I would put slot corner up there as possibly one of them. Would you agree with that, or is there another position that you think that probably deserves a little bit more attention right away?
No, I mean, I think slot corner is up there. I think it's one of the number one number one positions they need to address. I think wide receiver is right next to it, though. I mean, running with only 5 guys, given the depth that they have, talent wise, I would say, obviously we've talked about Brandon Ayuk a lot and everything like that, but we're not sure how that's going to play out. So, but they need to add something there, whether it's speed, route runner or something like that. Wide receiver is right there as well.
Yeah, I would probably put like slot corners up there, but I think I would put wide receiver up there as one of the main, if not the main position. It's got to be. They can't go with that 5 some into the season.
Yeah, I would say like 1A, 1B, to be honest with you. I mean, I think they're both up there. Like, I think, obviously George Pickens is Pickens is Pickens, but I think it drops off a little bit after that.
Quite a bit.
Everyone's, a lot of people are saying Van Jefferson is not a number 2. I'm not saying he is, but I think he could be a decent number 3 option if you get a little bit better of what he did in Los Angeles when the Rams won the Super Bowl. After that, it's kind of up in the air. I mean, you would hope that Roman Wilson comes back, hits the ground running, and has a great rookie season, but I think that's up in the air with his ankle injury. So there's definitely a need for a number 2 wide receiver. Someone who can go get the ball and work opposite of George Pickens, draw a little bit of attention away from Pickens on a consistent basis.
Yeah, I do think, and like I said, as we continue, and we talked a little bit about it yesterday, the CD Lamb contract does make the Brandon Ayuk situation still very interesting. Maybe that is ultimately what ends up happening here. Maybe the Steelers do actually prevail and get Brandon Ayuk. I don't know, but if they don't, and it's Tim Patrick or Noah Brown or another kind of quality addition there, they need something. They need to improve that room. Brandon Ayuk is an obvious massive addition where if George Pickens were to go down, you still have an elite receiver out there. But if you don't bring in Ayuk and it's let's just say Noah Brown, I mean, if Pickens goes down and Noah Brown is your 1, or Van Jefferson is your 1, that's what I'm talking about.
That's where it gets murky. Like, that's where, I mean, if George Pickens goes down, that's where it gets murky with the wide receiver room, because then you're looking at like, Pat Freiermuth probably being, the 1A, 1B with Van Jefferson as, receiving options. But, if Pickens goes down, it gets real murky.
Yeah, I agree. And we don't want to forget that Roman Wilson is kind of a wild card here too.
Yeah.
I do think at some point he could become a pretty significant contributor, but I also don't expect them to rush him back.
Yeah.
Because of the injury. And now, granted, he's back to doing light activity in practice. I do think, I don't know if he'll be ready for week 1, but he's definitely, I would say in terms of light activity, he's probably on par with Jaylen Warren as opposed to Troy Fautanu. I don't think he's as far along. But either way, this is still a room. This is still a position that needs additions. Now, again, if you look at the initial 53-man roster and be like, yeah, I'm not excited about the receivers. Again, I don't think that this is the group of 5 that begin the season in Atlanta. I do think that there are going to be moves made, whether that is a big time trade or if it's a nice addition, through these waivers or whatever it is. But I do think that they'll add. Any other spots on the roster? Any other surprises? Des Fitzpatrick. Speaking of receivers, I kind of wanted to bring it. That to me was because I thought that they, last year they had 6 receivers on the roster, and one of the main reasons why was because they kept Miles Boykin so they could have a gunner Well, Des Fitzpatrick was probably the best gunner they could have had at receiver, and they decided to not go with him. They waived him, and so now they really don't have a gunner at receiver. So that's why whenever it was brought up earlier by, I think it was Crispy 71 brought it up, Miles Boykin is an interesting guy if the Steelers can somehow snag him.
Yeah. I mean, like I said kind of earlier, he was the one surprise, one of the couple surprises that I thought, just because of his ability to play gunner. Obviously I think he kind of came on strong towards the end of training camp. He looked good against the Lions. I think he had a couple passes, one long, one down the sideline. But it's the nature of the business, I think. But like we've said, I think they're going to add to that room, and I would assume they're going to try to go find someone that can also, be versatile enough to play on special teams, is probably a gunner.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't think we really have much more to react to today. Again, tomorrow we'll have probably plenty to talk about, even though we kind of already know who the quarterback's going to be. But Mike Tomlin is supposed to be making his announcement or whatever. He's supposed to address the media tomorrow. He's supposed to name a starting quarterback. He says he would do it at the end of the week. Well, tomorrow's the last availability of the week, so I would expect Tomlin to officially name Russell Wilson as the quarterback. But we will also have the chance to react to any potential waiver claims, any trades that have been made, obviously. And if we get a situation in which, maybe there is a blockbuster trade that's made, we can always try to do an emergency episode of the show to react to it. I think tomorrow is going to be a pretty busy day too.
Yeah.
Just to, maybe not as busy as today was, just because the amount of, if anybody had alerts on for like all the national reporters, your phone was just going off and off just all day long. But Mark here, see, people are understanding the value of a guy like Boykin. Mark says, "What's up, DK PS family? Do we pick up Boykin yet?" Like, listen, like if they can get Boykin, they have their gunner issue solved. I think if it's Boykin and Darius Rush both on the outside, I think that's okay. I think you can get away with that.
Yeah,
those are. Yeah, again, it's. When you have a really good punter, you don't have to have the best gunners in the world, but you need to have at least something. And, that'll just make the special teams a little bit better. So any final thoughts on the roster that you wanted to share before we jumped off? And then, because like I said, tomorrow we're probably gonna have a pretty busy day to react to a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I think the only other thing that really popped out to me was the Logan Lee, Isaiah Loudermilk situation towards the back end of the defensive line. You and I talked about it yesterday a little bit. I think it's, obviously Logan Lee's versatility to be able to play special teams and things of that nature probably contributed to him making it. He was back in a uniform today. So, he's probably progressing from not playing on Saturday. And, I think those two situations, it was, kind of a toss-up of is it one or the other, and both ended up making it. So you would think if they make any outside additions, maybe one of those is a casualty. And then, let me ask you this. Were you surprised that Mark Robinson made it?
A bit, but I kind of had an 11th hour radical change because I surveyed the locker room quite a bit yesterday. And I was kind of trying to get a feel for how certain players were feeling. I didn't talk to Mark, but I talked to a lot of the guys that have a locker around him. And a lot of them were ranting and raving about him. Like, dude, like, you don't understand the growth that he's had. And maybe I just haven't been paying as much attention. Maybe that's on me. I don't know. But they had been ranted and raved about him. And so it kind of surprises me just because a fifth linebacker is just usually really difficult to justify. But at the same time, I get it. I understand it if they just would rather have that depth right now while they try to figure out other things. Because listen, they can have that depth right now, and they still have other guys that are probably more likely roster casualties for any further moves. Jalen Elliott being one of them. Isaiah Loudermilk's probably one of them. Ryan McCollum could be one if they can bring in another guy who could play center. You know, that they have a few other guys that they could possibly cut before they would have to cut ties with Mark Robinson. So, and Jordan here says, you know, great motor, great athlete, or great motor, good athlete. The biggest, the best way I've can define Mark Robinson is that he is a heat-seeking missile, but he has a broken guidance chip. It's just sometimes he just hits the closest warm body, whether it's also on somebody on his team or if it's somebody else on the other team. Just sometimes that guidance chip is out of whack, and he hits the wrong guy. Now, he hits him hard, but he hits the wrong guy. You know, I remember there being a run against the Packers last year in which he made the right read and he went and attacked the hole, but he hit the crap out of the lineman instead of the running back when he had at least a somewhat of a play at the running back. It's like, dude, you got to make a play at the runner. You know, hitting the lineman does almost nothing at that point. So it's just, you know, a little bit surprised, but again, I like to kind of say the same thing again. I did have a bit of an 11th hour change after I talked to some players, you know, and now granted, players don't make the decisions. But when you kind of hear a whole bunch of guys ranting and raving about it, it kind of made me think like, oh, maybe he does make the roster. And he did. So, but only 3. The other thing we didn't talk about yet, 3 edge rushers.
3 edge rushers. That's kind of, I feel like, you know, in a way to kind of like connect the dots in a way. Like, I mean, you wrote about it a little bit in your article, but the Marvin Leal having that ability to, you know, play outside linebacker and play, you know, come off the edge and everything like that, maybe freed up them to go with, you know, 3 inside or 3 outside linebackers, and also gave them an ability to maybe go with a 5th on the inside. You know, kind of freeing up that spot for Mark Robinson. Yeah.
All righty, so we're going to go ahead and wrap this thing up really quick. Just Jordan brings up a good point about Mark Robinson. He said, isn't that the part of the transition from running back to linebacker? For those who don't know, Mark Robinson was a running back like through high school and college, and it wasn't until I think his final year of college that he transitioned to linebacker. So he is still, like, even now, still very, very young, like very inexperienced at the position. And so to say that he was raw, like DeMarvin Leal was raw coming out of college, really, really raw coming out of college, but not as raw as Mark Robinson. Mark Robinson was really, really raw because he had almost no experience playing the position. And so maybe it's just this growth. Maybe that's what it is. And Spice, you know, here says, you know, he's still learning. It's very possible. The problem is, and the reason why I started to have some serious doubts that he would even make the roster is that for a team that, number one, tries to win a Super Bowl every year. Now, granted, that's a whole different rabbit hole we're gonna not go down right now. But still, for a franchise that puts it out there that says we try to win a Super Bowl every year, and for a team that does have a tangible urgency that's different this year as opposed to previous years, you don't have time to bring along guys who are still just learning. Like, you have to have a 53-man roster that is ready to compete.
Yeah.
And so that's why I really began to have serious doubts about him making the roster. But if they went with 5, then he was going to be that 5th guy, and that's where he is right now. So as long as they decide to keep 5 inside linebackers on the roster, I think he's going to have a job.
Yeah, agreed.
All righty. So we're going to go and wrap it up. We'll get back on tomorrow, probably normal time, or at least normal time for this week, 4:00. That is Eastern time. And, you know, like I said, noon tomorrow is the cutoff for teams submitting waiver claims, or, you know, claims for players that were waived today. So we will probably see more moves made tomorrow, whether that be waiver claims, whether that be trades, whatever it is. I would expect there to be more roster moves. Also, Mike Tomlin will address the media tomorrow before the team takes a little 4-day siesta. before they get back to the South Side next week to prepare for Atlanta. And so we'll have plenty to talk about tomorrow. So until then, you guys take care of yourselves. We'll catch you guys on the flippity flip.
See you later, guys.